Hi, I'm Douglas Anderson, CEO of Wall Street Capital Partners. And today on New to the Street, we've got a very interesting guest. I'm very pleased to welcome Jonathan Javitt, CEO of NRX Pharmaceuticals. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Happy that you're here. You're developing some amazing products, and these are products that are kind of near and dear to my heart because I'm a former veteran. I was in the Marine Corps, and I also served for many years on the U.S. Veterans Cemetery Board. And I understand that some of your products are addressing mental illness and particularly veteran suicide epidemic and things centered around that. One of the drugs that you're focused on, which is surprising to me, is ketamine, because this is a relatively mature, old drug, and you found some new way to use it. Can you explain that to us?
Well, not only is ketamine a mature old drug, it actually has a real connection to your previous line of work. Ketamine was developed as a battlefield anesthetic during the Vietnam War. It was the first anesthetic developed that doesn't make you stop breathing so that battlefield medics could safely use it. But it's developed a new life as we've started to understand what drives this whole national crisis of suicide. So mental illness is probably one of the most destructive words we could have to understand a phenomenon that, it's really the only phenomenon in nature that, causes an animal to destroy itself. How could that possibly happen? And these old Freudian notions of, how your mother treated you and all that stuff is just garbage. What we're understanding is that suicidal depression, PTSD, is a loss of what we call neuroplasticity in the brain. The brain cells just stop making new connections to other brain cells. And what's even worse, some of the connections that they've made, thoughts of, I'm worthless, my work is worthless, people are going to find out. When they find out, I'll lose my job. All of those notions are biological notions. And ketamine is one of the first generation of neuroplastic drugs that cause the brain cells to start making new connections, to sever the old ones, and to enable people to focus their lives away from those, self-destructive behaviors. Now, it's not the only neuroplastic treatment. People are finding results caused by what's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, where the same powerful magnets that are used in an MRI are used outside the head to cause the brain cells to make new connections. People are finding that hyperbaric oxygen therapy does the same thing. And it's really understanding the difference between a computer, as we understand it, and the brain's computer. Because if you take you take a bunch of sand and melt it down into silicon, take that wafer, etch it with a laser, you can put 5 million transistors into it, and you can use software to turn transistors on and off. That's how computers work. But you'll never change the basic wiring inside that chip unless you smash it with a hammer. The brain's very different. The brain is constantly growing new connections to other brain cells. That's called neuroplasticity. And it's those new connections that form thoughts. And for the first time in human history, we're able to alter that biology. So ketamine's an old drug with a new life. Now, in terms of what we're doing to commercialize it in a new way, all of that ketamine that was developed during the Vietnam era hasn't changed. And all of it has a toxic preservative in the bottle, preservative called benzethonium fluoride. That preservative is toxic to the point where FDA doesn't even allow it to be used in hand cleansers and topical antiseptics today. And people always thought that it was needed to keep the ketamine stable in the bottle. Well, it turns out that's not true. And we've developed a preservative-free form of ketamine that gives you the benefits without the toxicity of that preservative. The other problem we're solving is the ketamine supply chain these days is mostly manufactured overseas. Ketamine's been in constant drug shortage for the last couple of years as it's developed this new life. And we're manufacturing that preservative-free ketamine in West Columbia, South Carolina, in a single dose vial that's protected against diversion and other forms of abuse because ketamine is an abusable drug. So we're giving it a whole new life.
Fascinating, amazing. Happy to hear these solutions coming that are so desperately needed today. Uh, do you have any other drugs in the pipeline that are showing progress?
Well, as our shareholders know, we have another drug, NRX-101, which is based on a compound called D-cycloserine, and we have two phase 2 trials showing that D-cycloserine reduces suicidal ideation, reduces a symptom called akathisia, which is this horrible need to move, to do something. People say they feel like they're jumping out of their skins. And all too often, people with depression and akathisia not only feel like they're jumping out of their skins, but they jump off of buildings and in front of trains. And D-cycloserine is the first drug that's ever been shown to reduce akathisia. Now, what's happened in the last couple of years, which to us is breathtaking, is I talked a little bit about transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, as a treatment that's FDA approved, that's highly effective at reducing symptoms of depression and suicidality. There are now several clinical trials showing that D-cycloserine improves the effectiveness of TMS double or triple. This was first shown by a professor named McGeer in British Columbia, and now you're hearing leaders at Harvard and other leading medical institutions replicating that finding that if you add D-cycloserine, which is a potent neuroplastogen, in other words, it induces brain cells to make those new connections. If you add D-cycloserine before you do TMS, it's like fertilizing the field before you plant the seeds. And there's clinical evidence and clinical trials showing that D-cycloserine has a potential to double or triple the effectiveness of TMS. We're going to be taking that to the FDA in the very near future.
Wow, exciting breakthroughs. So I noticed the stock popped up and there was news from the FDA. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Even before we get FDA approval for these new uses of ketamine, we think it's important to replace the old generic drug supply with the non-preserved single-dose form of ketamine. And we've been in the process of what's called the ANDA process, abbreviated new drug application, which is the way you get a new generic onto the market for the preservative-free ketamine. And just this week, we announced that FDA had advised us the suitability petition for the presentation, what they call the strength, which is both the dose and the concentration of ketamine, was approved, which clears the way for us to resubmit our abbreviated new drug application.
Amazing. Now this is something that I found fascinating. You're not just a biotech, you're also opening clinics and you're doing it in an aggressive fashion across the country. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I'd rather